It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Yasuko Tsuchikane. Dr. Tsuchikane holds a PhD in Japanese art history from Columbia University and currently teaches at the Cooper Union and at the Waseda University in Tokyo. Specialist of the visual culture of the 20th century Japan, Dr. Tsuchikane has widely published and gave presentations around the world. She has 2 book projects currently. One is titled Amateurism and Calligraphy in Post-War Japanese Art, jointly editing with Eugenia Bodagnova-Kumar and Ida Yuan. And another one is titled Dōmoto Inshō and the Sacred Art World, the Making of Modern Temple Art in the 20th Century. Her current research project also includes the study of points of contact and parallelism between Japanese ceramics and European ceramic art in the 20th century. I first met Dr. Tsuchikane when we invited her to a symposium organized for the exhibition Isamu Noguchi and Chibashi, Beijing 1930, which happened in 2013. Her talk was looking at the intersection of post-war Japanese ceramics and international art scene, which is very stimulating to me. So for a long time, I wanted to invite her back to Michigan. So she's one of the several scholars who's working in the art field and media, which are not usually, have been categorized outside of the so-called Gendai Bijutsu or contemporary art, such as, ceramics, calligraphy, religious art, prints, and flower arrangements. And Gendai Bijutsu usually referred to like installation art or, abstract paintings and those kind of, categories. And they show that issues such as critical engagement in society and history, or globalization, or national identities were equally significant in these fields. When she was here in 2013, we also found out that we were both students of Professor Jonathan Reynolds, historian of Japanese architecture, who used to teach here, and also now he teaches at the Barnard College and Columbia University. So her talk today is titled Modern Temple Art as Public Art. Please welcome Dr. Yasuko Tsuchikane.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Center for Japanese Studies at the University of Michigan very much for providing me this wonderful opportunity to speak to you today. I'm especially grateful for Ms. Barbara Kinzer at the center and Dr. Natsu Oyobe for so kindly coordinating this talk for me. The title of my talk, Modern Temple as Public Art, suggests an experimental framework that I'm employing on one of my ongoing research projects. I'm currently writing a monograph about Japan's 20th century architecture paintings for historical Buddhist temples in a specific contemporary social context of their patronage, creation, and reception. As a case study, my work focuses on the single artist Dōmoto Inshō that you see, who produced the greatest quantity of such art in 20th century Japan. My study is double-sided in its scope. In one sense, that project is to write one of the first book-length studies devoted to delineating the history of modern Japanese Buddhist art that concentrates on the works of a single artist. But my intention is also to position Japan's 20th century art for Buddhist temples as a genre of modern art in Japan. My particular aim here is to resituate the genre in a more contemporary, specific context away from the general aura of tradition that frequently surrounds Japanese temple sites and art situated in these spaces, regardless of whether such works is pre-modern or modern. In order to demystify historical temples and their artworks, I decided to set up some tactics for shifting the tone of the narrative from one of the romanticizing generalization to that of a more historical examination. This involves some rethinking, such as deciding to give an active voice to temples as a modern religious institutions with their own intention and agency instead of assuming them to be essentially passive establishment. A second strategy is not to see a temple site as a given static space representing history and religion, but rather to recharacterize it as an active contemporary public arena for political authority, modern media, the general public, and cultural figures such as artists and intellectuals to use to define the relationship between past and present and a religion and secular ideas. The framework of public art in my talk today is a new heuristic device that I'm using in this direction. Since this is the first time for me to try out this framework for my study in the lecture, my argument may well lack in precision. So any criticism or suggestion will be very welcome to improve my thesis. Let me explain how I'll proceed with today's presentation. First, I will introduce the general topic of my study. I will update the situation surrounding modern Japanese art for Buddhist temples to the present day in the early 21st century and try to problematize it in relation to my interest. Next, I will briefly introduce the artistic career of the protagonist of my study, Dōmoto Inshō, particularly in the area of temple art. Thirdly, I will explain more about my usage of the term public art as a part of the basic conceptual framework of my study. Lastly, I will discuss two of Inshō's temple art undertakings, his sliding door paintings at Tōji or Kyo-Gokokuji Kyoto that he completed in 1934, and the group of icon murals at Shitennoji, Osaka that he painted between 1938 and 40. In the abstract that I initially proposed for this talk, I was planning to analyze his work at Tōji and, instead of those at Shitennoji, his abstract sliding doors for Saihōji, better known as Kokedera in 1969 that you see. However, I found in his Shitennoji and Tōji project more in common to discuss in relation to the framework of public art. So today, I will deal with these two projects which he completed before the end of World War II and save his post-war Kokedera project for my future analysis as public art, since it will require me to further investigate this case. The general topic of my presentation today is about a cultural practice of Japan's Buddhist temple institutions that has become increasingly popular and common in the past few decades. The recruitment of well-known artists to create artworks that adorn the interiors of their pre-existence or newly constructed buildings. Typically, commissioning artistic celebrities has become one of the major means for temple institutions to attract interest to themselves by provoking attention from the mass media. It has been also a primary strategy for temples to reshape their public images away from sites pregnant with the nostalgia of a pre-modern religious history and toward one of the crossroads of contemporary art and culture that can be neoclassical, avant-garde, or popular. With some interesting exceptions that you see here, such as the pictures made through manga-style pen drawings on your left and the cloth dyeing techniques on your right. Many such works have been paintings, often done by artists trained in Nihonga, a neoclassical genre of Japan's modern paintings, and mostly monumental in scale and mounted in a pre-modern formats of sliding doors or fusuma, or done as murals or hekiga. The 20th and 21st century art of sliding doors and murals, or modern contemporary shohekiga or shoheiga in Buddhist temples, have established themselves as a distinct genre of visual art in Japan. I just want to clarify that when byobu or freestanding screens are grouped with sliding door panels, scholars use the category shoheiga instead of shohekiga for the painting on these interior partitions. In my presentation, I will refer to this genre of art as modern temple art. This phenomenon of increasing prominence and prevalence of temple art in Japan is a welcome sign for me to keep pursuing my interest in analyzing how these works were conceived in relation to the socio-political and cultural climates of the time in which they were created. This is a problem which I would like to clearly differentiate from the studies of Japanese pre-modern murals and sliding door paintings, a well-established field of scholarship in Japanese art history. Through the 1980s, murals and sliding doors paintings created after the Meiji period were often regarded as a modern offspring of this lineage of Japanese pre-modern mural and sliding door paintings. The zenith of such earlier works in terms of artistic achievement occur in the early Heian period, 794 to 1185, in the case of Aiko murals, and during the Momoyama period, 1573 to 1615, for sliding door paintings. The sense of linearity of the continuous development of the pre-modern art of architecture paintings to modernity has been in part fortified by the very continuation of the custom of temples commissioning such works over the course of history up to today. For example, Kongo-buji at Mankoya, founded in 819 by Kukai as one of the central institutions of the Shingon sect, has accumulated numerous murals and sliding door paintings, which include a number of 20th and 21st century works. Inshō's icon painted in 1942 on the surface of 16 pillars in the Great Tower or Daito at Mankoya among them. You can see the example here. In 1980, Mankoya published a compilation of a body of its shoheiga up to the group of Buddhist icon murals from 1934 by Kimura Buzan and sliding door paintings 1 year earlier by Ishizaki Koyo. You see Ishizaki Koyo on the left and Kimura Buzan on the right. This provocation of a vague sense of continuity often reflects the standard mode of Buddhist temple narratives of their own institutional histories compiled, understandably, as a means of religious propagation by situating themselves as a perpetuator of the Dharma down through the century. For the purpose of my study, however, this type of narrative, which I believe is reflected in the Mankoya's volume to a certain extent, distracts our attention from the historical reality that the Mankoya undertaking by Koyo and Buzan in the early 20th century were positioned in their artistic careers very differently from the way in which Kano school masters under the patronage of politically, economically, and socially powerful routinely receive their temple commissions. While Koyo and Buzan are not necessarily well-known artists today, in their own generation, they are among the most highly regarded painters due to their prominence established within Japan's modern institutional system of official annual national salons, first inaugurated in 1907 after the French model. Commissions received from religious institutions such as temple, no matter how historically prestigious they were, may have been options that needed to be balanced or negotiated against their statuses within the state institutional art establishment. So, how do we counteract this narrative of continuity? What I have found to be the most readily available mode of references to how we perceive our works in temple is assertion of perceivers' modern subjectivities that poetically interpret historical temples and their artifacts as nostalgic, aestheticized sites and objects under the rubric of the ancient temples or koji. It has been much discussed about how this framework of ancient temples has generated a prolonged influence over the number of writers, photographers, as well as movies and TV producers, particularly starting from the early post-World War II era, that has consolidated that romantic but overgeneralizing and ahistorical association between temples and the nation's pre-industrial past in various media. Can the desire to participate in the modern nationwide collective longing for the lost past symbolized by temples be also considered a major motive for those involved with modern temple art to commission, produce, and view it? When I confront the case of most recent example, Mankoya sliding door undertakings by Senju Hiroshi that he completed early this year, it appears to me that for this early 20th century Nihongo artist, his art for the temple has less to do with a sense of nostalgia attached to the temple site than it did with adding a significant arena of artistic competence to his portfolio, which can be exhibited in museum in its entirety. While having been trained in one of the most established academies, the Nihonga division at the Tokyo School of Art, Senju belongs to an increasing population of independent painters with no fixed affiliation with a particular organizing exhibition group. He has been maneuvering among multiple artistic sectors, including having a number of solo exhibitions domestically and abroad, winning an honorable mention at the 1995 Venice Biennale and executing a number of major temple undertakings. One interesting development out of this wide-ranging activity is his act of temporal removal of his temple art from temple sites. He literally integrated his temple art into his solo exhibition instead. In the same manner in which his temple work for the annex of Jukoin at Daitokuji had been shown in two major museums right after their completion in 2003. Senju's most recent sliding or painting for Mount Koya have been currently in nationwide touring exhibition, which has already stopped at 3 locations and will make its final stop in Yokohama early next year. In these exhibitions, the detachable nature of sliding door from their originally intended locations have allowed his temple art to be on display along with other major paintings. I believe that by looking back a few decades, one can see that precursor of this artistic practice of publicizing his newly created temple artworks in museum spaces in 1975 and 80 when Higashiyama Kai, a Nihonga painter, completed 2 groups of sliding door paintings over 2 phases for the Founders Hall or Miedo in Tōshō Daiji, Nara. The overwhelming popularity of Higashiyama's Tōshō Daiji series, which have been exhibited multiple times, including this year, since their completion in major museums such as Tokyo and Kyoto National Museums, testify to the naturalization of this practice. Public viewing opportunities for temple art no longer need to be in temple sites. The first public acceptance of Higashiyama's practice in the mid-1970s was a turning point for Japanese modern temple art. Since then, artists may advocate their temple commission as a part of a significant and integral process of building one's artistic career by actively displaying temple artworks in museum spaces. I believe that the artistic career of Dōmoto Inshō that ended right around Higashiyama's seminal success in the mid-1970s, in fact, prepare for this artist's self-consciousness about temple art to be the genre of painting that could potentially match or compete with the significance of one's exhibition pieces among one's body of work. To my knowledge, Dōmoto Inshō was a recipient of the largest number of distinguished commissions granted to a single artist since the late 19th century by the community of Buddhist institutions. Shortly after his graduation from the Kyoto School of Painting or Kyoto Kaiga Senmon Gakko in 1924, Inshō quickly became a rising star of Nihonga in the state's exhibition system of the Imperial Academy of Fine Art or Teikoku Bijutsu Kyokai by the mid-1920s. It was around this time when he received his temple commission from Daitokuji. Through the early 70s, besides his active participation in various exhibitions, he continued to work on numerous undertakings for historical temples for over half a century. You see this chart that I compiled. I can just show you. This is kind of he got a lot. There are only like really representative stuff, and then I'm going to talk about the 1934 Tōji in green, their chronological order, and then I'm also going to talk about the Shitennoji in yellow, but it continues like this. So it's a very impressive list. Many of them are among the most, yes, many of them, as you can see, were among the most prestigious institutions in Japan and came from various sectarian affiliations such as Rinzai Zen in Daitokuji, and the Shingon 6, Tōji, Ninnaji, Daigoji, and Mankoya. I think maybe I should show this. Yeah. And for the 15 representative temples on this list that you're looking at, he produced a total of 600 panels of sliding door painting, fusumae, and murals. Okay. In addition to his highly energetic productivity, what most distinguished Inshō from other Japanese temple artists was an unusually wide range of artistic styles. In the domain of his entries to exhibition, Inshō has been best known in the history of Nihonga for his its unusual move to the international avant-garde mode of abstract art in the post-World War II period, from the orthodoxy of the Kyoto school of Nihonga before the end of the war. Parallel stylistic changes are found in his temple art. In his earlier works from the 1920s and 30s, he employed an eclectic combination of East Asian traditional pictorial styles, a typical choice for temple art at the historical sites created after the late 19th century through today. In the 1960s, here you see on the right, he started experimenting with Euro-American inspired abstraction for temple decoration, which was then considered an not so appropriate choice, and still remains a rather unusual form with which to adorn medieval temple settings. Inshō, with his multifaceted artistic inclinations and artistic styles, as well as his affiliation, has challenged scholars to reformulate the scope of the social relationship that has been assumed to bind 20th century artists. I believe one such overlooked relationship has been his lifetime association with a network of individuals and institutions who supported the art project for Buddhist temples. The period when he started his temple art career marked the time when Buddhism and its historical institutions were in acute need of reinventing their identity in modern society, following the religion's persecution by the state in the late 19th century. I believe it was a result of Inshō's relationship with temple art supporters that he received such a large number of distinguished temple commissions, a fact that helped consolidate his status among the foremost modern Buddhist artists during his lifetime. Then, why might it be useful to employ public art to my study on Inshō's temple art? It is a part of my experiment to borrow some of the most universally circulated terminologies from the art historical discussions on modern and contemporary Western art as a heuristic tool. I'm aware of the potential criticism that the adoption of Western art history terms may appear to support the discipline's convention to presuppose the hierarchy of modernist artistic modernism, assuming the central-periphery divide should be assigned to the West and non-West. That includes Japan. However, my intention here is to disturb some assumptions established within Japanese art history. My borrowing of term is not only for the purpose of freeing historical temples and modern temple art from their typical association with the time prior to Japan's modernity, such as tradition, nostalgia, or derivation from pre-modern artistic achievement, as I discussed earlier, but also for disrupting one postulate within the scholarship of 20th century art history in Japan. Besides the framework of public art, the other term that I'm borrowing from my study from Western art history is the art world. This term is typically defined as a system or a social sector comprising those who institutionalize and influence what is to be accepted as significant artworks, distinguished from what is insignificant or non-art. When Inshō was active as an artist, particularly in his youth from the 1920s through early 40s, Japan had an equivalent of an art world, gadan in Japanese, the professional art establishment comprising art policy makers, critics, exhibition juries, professors of art academies, and major painters featured in public exhibition. Importantly, this art world selected masters and masterpieces for the governmental annual public exhibitions such as Bunten and Inten, in the division of Nihonga that I mentioned earlier, where Inshō consolidated his position as one of the star artists and cultural celebrities. On the other hand, Inshō's career as a temple art master allows me to identify, besides this society of art professions, another group of network individuals, group of networks of individuals exercising their influence on the production of artworks for Buddhist temples that also attract the attention of the general public. I think I just went too far, excuse me. For purpose of comparison, I decided to name this group the Sacred Art World, which was composed of multiple parties and interest groups that patronized each of or a series of his temple art projects. These parties included temple and sectarian institutions, community of businessmen, politicians, intellectuals of Buddhist culture, and mass media. Since Inshō interacted with these groups when he received commissions, he was also a part of the Sacred Art World as a maker of temple art. According to the belief system of Buddhism in general, the making of Buddhist artifacts, particularly icons for a Buddhist temple, is understood in a specific way. In this system, the maker is not necessarily the most significant parties. Instead, all parties involved in supporting such productions, say patrons, makers, recipients, and worshippers of these works, are crucial parties who gain merit from their acts evolving around the works. As a devout Buddhist believer, Inshō followed this concept. This way of positioning an artist like Inshō as a participant in two large systems that produce and define the significance of art in two social spheres, the Circle of Buddhist Temple Art Supporters on one hand, and the Society of Art Professionals and Institutions managing public art exhibition on the other hand, I believe, would decentralize what has been taken as one of the postulates in 20th century Japanese art history, namely the singular importance of the artist as the agent for art production. Okay, here you go now. Now, let's talk about the other term I adopted from Western art history, public art, a part of the title of today's talk. As often discussed, the discourse on public art in Western art is a product of the popularity of installations and sculpture in public space and lawn art among Euro-American artists in the 1970s and 80s. I'm aware that to equate Japan's modern temple art with public art may be considered fairly loose, given that the very definition of public art in Western art history has a range of possible interpretations depending on how publicness is understood, such as accessibility, civic society, or urban settings. I believe, however, the broad and inclusive identity of public art can be useful to adopt due to its flexibility. The public nature of Buddhist temple sites in Japan's 20th century can be related to their multiple functions as social spaces which the state controlled, about which the general public discussed and imagined, and where artworks were viewed. In contrast, temple sites used the religious ritual spaces can be argued to be the inverse side of public spaces due to the limited accessibility and secluded nature. Furthermore, there are actual discourses or at least some awareness on the nature of publicness in Japanese society in the circumstances surrounding the temple art project and other art activities in which Inshō participated. This includes the publicness of art viewing, the rise of mass media which reported his commission, and public support of the state ideology that motivated the project to be realized. Since my thinking about this area is still evolving, I would like to touch upon how I'm applying it by introducing some specific example of his temple projects. The first of Inshō's temple art project I would like to talk about is that for Tōji, or Kyogokuji in 1934. He designed and executed the painting of birds and flowers, landscape, and garden scene that were mounted in 48 sliding door panels and installed in all 6 rooms in the newly constructed reception hall called Shōshibo, which was a generic designation of a small residential temple structure. The construction of Shōshibo and the subsequent decisions to decorate the building with Inshō's painting were a part of multiple building projects organized in celebration of a very special memorial service held by the temple. Between April 12 and April 21st in 1934, Tōji carried out the grand service that celebrated 1100th anniversary of the death of the Shingon sect founder, Kukai. This commemoration was the most recent example of institutional tradition shared by all Shingon affiliate temples throughout Japan, which consider this service as one of the most important religious events called onki or ongi, which was to be conducted by each temple every 50 years. The complexity of the matters regarding the nature of the reception hall and Inshō's paintings which embellish its interior started with Tōji's utilization of this 1934 memorial as a special occasion to draw public attention to the temple's distinctive history. In 823, Tōji, then an official state temple, was granted to Kukai by Emperor Saga to use as a major site of worship for the former's own Buddhist factions. Through the commemoration, Tōji's Office of Kukai Commemoration in 1934 interpreted and publicized via its official statement and other means this moment of history in 823 as a source of the institution's inherent timeless identity and temple of special imperial favor. Reimagining institutional tradition in 1930s largely means reimagining Japanese Buddhism altogether, whose socio-political economic power had been famously weakened since the advent of the Meiji period. This act of reimagination was, as a result of Buddhist world's tactical reforming of the religion for the purpose of institutional survival, in an effort to cope with the modern state's religious policies that had relegated Buddhism. Among the same line of thinking, Tōji even pushed another image of its past history. 1934, the same year of the Kukai commemoration, Tōji was designated as one of the national historical sites associated with the Southern Court, the historical line of imperial lineage believed to be legitimate by governmental sponsors, historians such as Kuroita Katsumi that you see on the right. One of the reasons for the designation was the medieval shoshibo that no longer existed, but which had served as a temporal residence for multiple emperors, including Emperor Daigo. In order to highlight the importance of the period when the temple acted as the center of the Southern Court along with Godaigo residency, it was crucial for Tōji to designate the new reception hall constructed in 1934 to honor Kukai with a name associated with the Southern Imperial legacy. With its nominal revival of Godaigo's court in 1934, Tōji secured its position as a material embodiment of official ideology of the nation that inculcates an absolute relevance toward the emperor and succession of the imperial lineage. Instead of serving as an imperial residence, however, the modern shoshibo was assigned to function as a reception hall where the Shingon and temple representative would have audience with imperial envoys dispatched from the Ministry of the Imperial Household. You see the moment of the arrival at the gate of one of the gates at the Tōji in 1934. These envoy missions at the temple was, on behalf of the emperor, to witness two of Tōji's most historically renowned esoteric rituals that have drawn much scholarly attention in Japanese Buddhist studies. The rites of the relics, or bushariku, and the imperial rite of the second 7 days of the new year, or Goshinichi no Mishiho. And you see some really associated objects and paintings. Tōji's continual enactment of these two formal imperial rituals within its precincts through the 1930s reinforced the religio-political symbolism embedded in them that connected the Dharma to a secular kingship, following the convention of so-called state protection Buddhism, or Gokoku Bukkyo in Mahayana Buddhism. Within Shoshibo, the chamber of the imperial delegates was designed to play the central role as an audience hall dedicated to their exclusive use. Inshō's painting that you see here in the 5 large panels are situated to directly face the imperial delegates when all the sliding doors are closed. I think this is the one. This was a rather unconventional manner in which to display such works. Traditionally, sorry for the very face picture, that traditionally architecture paintings are located behind the guests of honor, who are usually, for the most part, framed by the painting so that the painting would visually highlight the guest's elevated status when the recipients of the audience see them. And you see this is a Nijo Castle example, very famous example. Within the chamber of Shoshibo, the delegates would be seated most of the time in front of the sole alcove space in the building, marking the most prestigious status in the entire structure allocated to the single spot. In this location, Shoshibo, the imperial envoy, privileged witness of the two esoteric Buddhist rituals, also act as the exclusive viewer of the modern paintings offered by the temple and donor and the maker in Dōmoto Inshō. The state of their viewing the paintings in almost complete seclusion may remind us of a theory in study of Buddhism and other religions, including that of the Brian Rappert and Barnard Farr and many others, that restricted access to religious rituals and ritualistic materials frequently underscore and empower the exclusive status of the privileged social group viewing them. The target of my next analysis is a group of Buddhist icons that Inshō painting between 1938 and 1994 for Shitennoji, or the Temple of the Four Heavenly Kings in Osaka City, which is one of Japan's oldest Buddhist institutions, allegedly founded in 593. In September 1934, the Muroto typhoon, one of the worst natural disasters to ever hit Western Japan up to that day, shattered the early 19th century Shitennoji pagoda into pieces. Within a few months, the project to rebuild the pagoda started, and so did the plan for Inshō's painting for its interior. For the newly constructed 5-tier structures, he created multiple murals that were combined with other artists' works to provide 32 compositions painted over the various architectural spaces within the structure. Among them, the religious focus point of the entire interior was the 4 painting icons of the Buddhas of the 4 cardinal directions that Inshō painted on the 4 sides of the square central pillars of the pagoda. Together, these 4 paintings served as the main icons in the structure. By the time of their completion, complete destruction by the Osaka city raid in March 1945, Inshō's icon paintings had gone through 2 phases of shifting contextualization. As a temple architecture and art project, the patronage for the new Shitennoji pagoda and its art proceeded along unprecedented paths in the first phase of contextualization. The building construction was largely financed from the budget of Osaka Prefecture or Osaka City government. This situated the Shitennoji reconstruction among the ongoing urban planning program comprising the city's disaster recovery and expansion plans under the rubric of the Great Osaka or Dai Osaka. The design reflected the city's economic prosperity, which had reached its zenith at the point when its population exceeded that of Tokyo and ranked Osaka as the 6th largest city in the world. Under Dai Osaka, the role assigned to the new pagoda as Shitennoji was to help further boost the city's national standing in terms of its historical legacy and cultural affairs, comparable to the recently reconstructed Osaka Castle and recently opened Osaka Municipal Art Museum, the nation's 2nd contemporary art museum. It was among these overlapping associations with the city that the architectural revival of Shitennoji cast that Inshō's pagoda icon came to be located when the Public Relationship Department of Osaka Asahi newspaper recruited him to undertake the painting project, which they solely financed starting from 1938. The Osaka Asahi newspaper and its counterpart, Osaka Mainichi newspaper, were 2 of the major city-based media companies. Both newspapers reported every step of the Shitennoji project, from city hall meeting to the progress of Inshō's painting. During the second phase of the contextualization, it was a temple institution with its motive to place its claimed sanctity in the service of the nation's war effort and ideological propaganda that determined the role of Inshō's icon. From May 22 and over the following 4 days in 1940, Saihōji held a series of Buddhist services to commemorate the full completion of the architecture and art. The service comprised traditional rituals, including the consecration of Inshō's icon with the pagoda, within the pagoda, and a commemoration of the 1,300-year anniversary of the death of Prince Shotoku, the founder of the temple. At the same time, the temple included rituals that were more directly in line with the state's glorification of Japan's empire, war propaganda, and its core ideology, namely, a Buddhist service joining the nation's grand celebration of the large 2600th year commemoration of the beginning of Japan's imperial reign, and another grand service for consoling the spirits of the war dead. Starting from the first day of these services, as soon as Inshō's icon had been consecrated, they became secret Buddha, or hibutsu, and direct visual access to them by the public was prohibited. On the other hand, in the context of Buddhist rituals, the icon gained their agency to exercise their efficacies by being an integral part of the pagoda, which stood alone right behind the middle gate or chumon, and before the golden hall or kondo, occupying the most significant location in the precinct for all the grand rituals that took place during these ceremonies. After the series of seminal religious events in 1940s, Saihōji declared its commitment to promoting the state's imperial ideology to support the war by fortifying the temple historical role to act as the center of the cult of Prince Shotoku, historically regarded as the embodiment of Japan's ethnic identity in culture, religions, and kinship. Without being seen, Inshō's icon abide in this religio-political framework of the temple institution and were believed to exercise their formidable power to contribute to the nation's war effort until the day of their destruction by the war. In conclusion, I will try to locate the publicness of Inshō's Tōji and Saihōji undertakings in the two aspects that they share, seen from the structure of large projects to which they belong. The first commonality is the way in which his painting commissions were part of three superimposed layers of project. None of Inshō's temple art could have existed independently from the building and temple compounds that they were intended to adorn, either in the form of sliding door or murals. In many cases, his paintings were commissioned within new buildings were to be erected. His paintings were commissioned when new buildings were to be erected. Furthermore, the projects to construct new buildings were often part of highly publicized events or commemorations that were conceived to publicize specific message to the public, either religious or secular, which provided the rationale for their construction. Members of the sacred art world were involved with all or some levels of these projects, which resulted in shaping the raison d'etre of Inshō's paintings. The second common denominator is the manner in which the respective temple institutions conceived the building construction as a revival of their historical precedents and provide a new set of roles and meaning to the revived buildings in relation to institutional needs in contemporary society. This contrivance of new functions and nature of temple buildings also determines these aspects regarding Inshō's paintings that embellish their interior space. The nature of these two of the Inshō's temple art projects as public art can be located in the intersections among the architectural, social, and religious spaces inside and outside of the temple sites in pre-World War II Japan. Thank you very much.
If anyone has questions?
Yes.
There was a slide, 2 slides back. That one. What is that image?
Oh, this one. I'm sorry, I didn't explain. This is a moment when unfortunately the old Saihōji was bombed, and I think This actually, I think the one on the right is actually the pagoda caught in fire. Yeah, thank you. I think I was just rushing so much that I didn't explain very well. But so currently, the Shitennoji actually has a totally new buildings, built afterwards too, and then has different kind of artworks commissioned to different artists. So they have a different life now. So this is all in the past, and it's literally gone in terms of physical presence. Thank you for the question.
Also, I wanted to ask you, you described the social aspects of the temple and the history and the politics and patronage and all these forces that prepared for this artwork and the architecture you described. One thing I think was somewhat missing was that you said almost nothing about the visuals.
I'm sorry.
Nothing. The visual, the image.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And you talked about continuity in temple art, and you showed some pictures, but no visual descriptions.
Yes.
Of
That's
the continuity.
Right. Yes.
This was all
contextual.
Non-visual.
Non-visual. Yes.
The art is visual.
Yes.
It is visual arts, not verbal arts. So I don't know what to say.
Thank you very much. It's a great question. When it comes to this particular artist, in a way, you can see I can talk about it in a very maybe different occasion, but he basically was very much neoclassical in the sense that he combined lots of different prototype. In this case, it's from a Heian period, well-known Buddhist paintings. He actually sort of collaged many different Buddhist paintings. He knew all of them through good publications, reproduction that time. And so it's actually very controversial when I talk to some Buddhist art specialists. So visually, this is like a real kind of patchwork of many famous Buddhist art that existed in the past. But when it comes to artistic value, there has been a lot of criticism about this because it's almost like informational overload in terms of visual details. So artistically, this is very interesting, but it was important for Dōmoto to actually stick to a certain iconographical requirements prescribed by certain ideas proposed by the temple. So that was actually number one. And number two, when it comes to a style, he actually was very committed to reviving neoclassicism. So I think if I talk about styles here, I would probably talk about many different matching of sort of details. And then maybe he polished and then sort of strengthens the colors very strongly, more vivid than the like Heian period Buddhist paintings, because he believes that originally the colors of Heian period Buddhist art must have been a lot more intensified. So this is a very strongly revivalistic Buddhist art, and that kind of goes to also sliding door that I show in Tōji. He combined many different influences. It's really kind of confirmed how neoclassical he was before World War II. And what's interesting to me is after World War II, and when he became very abstract, he became an abstract artist, then I think I would like to actually talk about the dramatic stylistic changes, because he's not really so derivative as much as neoclassic paintings. Thank you for a good question. I hope I answered your question.
Can I just follow up a little bit on over here? Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. That transition into the abstract, was that associated with the events of the war and leaving kind of the traditional, set type of art forms and being influenced by the destruction events as it affected modern art in the West. Would you say that there was a similar kind of process going on post-war?
Yes, great question. Actually, that's where I'm going, but I'm very careful to draw a very simplistic or sort of assume parallelism between the Western. I think I just tried to, because this is really the most interesting. I think my answer is yes and no. Actually, Inshō was actually a part of a post-World War II French avant-garde artists, the group of people, informel, who actually came to Japan to be mingled with Gutai, the very famous story. And through his Dōmoto Inshō's nephew, who was actually a part of informel, he actually did have a contact with the French avant-garde artists who actually sort of orientalized the whole notion of Zen. So I would say yes, but I think the way he developed his own abstract art was very different. First of all, he was a salon artist in Nihonga, and also stylistically, it's not so similar to informel. So it's, and also this is a Zen temple, so I actually like to contextualize in such a way, but he also used those abstract forms for non-Zen art temples as well. So I think he must have been aware of the discourses and artistic changes globally, particularly in the Western art circles. But I will be very careful kind of assuming the direct connection. So that's something that I really have to be carefully analyzing in the near future. Thank you very much.
Hi. I was really pleased to see the picture of the fusuma in Honen-in,
Yes.
because I ran into them just kind of randomly
Yes.
when the temple was open for viewing, and was blown away by them. And I know this wasn't part of your explanation of public art, which seemed to be more a kind of intersection of public and private sort of institutions. But as far as the public goes, the viewers around me, when we went into the room where the sliding doors were, the fusuma, the viewers around me expressed either through body language or verbally signs of disapproval
Yes.
and dislike.
Yes.
And I thought it was amazing, but I think it's because it disappointed their expectations for temple art. So I just wondered what sort of, since the 70s,
Yes.
what sorts of public reception have these much more modern and contemporary paintings being viewed with?
Thank you very much for a great question. That's something that I'm particularly interested in as well. In general, in the 1970s, I think the general public wasn't quite ready. So it was considered to be a bit of extremist, but this is the interesting things about the way the temples commission individual artists. In a sense, sometimes temples don't really care. I think that what they want is really a famous person, to sort of publicize. So even if it's negative, it's much better than not having anything. So I think that Honen actually had a personal relationship with Dōmoto Inshō and his older brother, and they just wanted Inshō to paint, and they basically told him that you can paint anything you want. So it's more like a choice of artists when it comes to sliding doors. I think when it comes to icons, that's a little different because it really has to have a very specific iconographical requirements that the artists actually understand. in order for that paintings to be, the religiously religiously effective, has an efficacy. But when it comes to sliding door, this is a lot more. Most of the time, I sort of generalize temple sites as both secular buildings and the also religious spaces. I kind of use both of them and combine them very roughly. But when it comes to secular spaces in temple sites, that's a little different from religious space. This is really just the way the temple wants to represent their concern about cultural affair. So thank you very much for a very good question. And it's interesting that I think the current high priest of Honen is very pleased about this. So it seems like that's what it matters. It's really the relationship between the temple institution or artists. Thank you very much. Great question.
Well, that is what I was trying to allude to, is that image and the one next to it, if you analyze it on the abstract sense, very similar.
Yes.
There are many similarities
Yes.
in this.
Yeah.
And so they are essentially the same.
I know what you're doing. I really do. I mean,
And so if somebody is objecting to this, is objecting to it through a non-visual thing, is that the expectation or being familiar with certain images and not seeing the similarity between these two, which is visual. The other things aren't. So.
Thank you very much for actually. Yeah, I know. I think I understood your point. Actually, it's a very significant point. I think it depends on how you define visual. I think you can define visual in several different levels, in different ways, at several different levels. First of all, for artists who was active in the exhibition, whether it was representative and neoclassic like that on the left, and it was abstract like that abstract on the right, the difference was very critical. I mean, the artist who belongs to exhibition groups, he or she will make a statement when this artist moved from representational or neoclassics to so obviously avant-garde and modern abstract. So that's one sense of visual. So that's very much related to the art world decision and the discourses made in art world in relation to really globalization of the whole art world. But as you pointed out very acutely, Inshō was very much aware of how to decorate the huge interior space, particularly based on a sort of a Momoyama vocabulary of placing certain branches diagonally. It just had a lot to do with the line directions and the big sweep of lines across the huge space in order to connect different panels and kind of make a statement when viewers are inside of the room. So in a way, throughout his life, he's been working out those formulas really consciously, even though it was the neoclassic or abstract. In a way, that's how he kind of built his career as a temple artist, to be able to kind of understand how the forms and space work in three-dimensional situations. So I know what you mean by visual, and I think you're absolutely right that I should really talk about it more. I've been so interested in the background information because I think maybe there are so many discussions about visual. Maybe I'm actually maybe overreacting to the tendency, but yes, of course, the visuals are very important. Thank you.
I have another question. When I was in school, there was a teacher here. His name was Rudolf Arnheim.
Yes.
And he was he studied or wrote books on the psychology of visuals and art. You know, I can't remember the exact wording of this. And I suggest maybe, do you know him, Rudolf Arnheim?
Yes, I know the name, and I even know this book, but I don't think I read it. It's really, but I should. It's a very famous book.
Yeah. So it's not a formula like that the artist formulated this. It's a principle, sort of.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually a very important point to talk about psychological effect on viewers in space. But I think I'm more interested in sort of social aspects. I like to think about temple sites as more like the social aspect where people actually have their kind of social identities. And visuals are really important, but psychology, I'm not sure whether Dōmoto was actually personally interested in psychology as much. I think since this is, I like to write this as a sort of historical study, I like to stick to what he was interested in. So maybe not so much with psychology in these monuments, even though the psychology in art is extremely important subject. Thank you.
So one more question.
Thank you very much for a fascinating, wonderful group of images to see, and it's. I hope you continue this doggedly because I think the 19th and 20th century Buddhist art is woefully understudied. So it's really wonderful to see this, and I think to connect it to a wider art world beyond just temples and to relegate it to a separate world doesn't make any sense. So I think it's really wonderful larger project. And I was just thinking about in the pre-modern context, when you have if you have a temple like a tachu in a zendera, it's almost always associated with some family. There's some rich patron, someone else, not the temple, that's driving the art that's in there in some way. And of course, if it's an icon, the head priest or the clergy might have a lot of say, but oftentimes, especially what's in those large fusume programs and like, is something slightly outside of their direct control. And in this case, I wonder to what degree, like where does the patronage lie? Is it rich Tōji saying we have all this money and we're going to be the agents in choosing what's going to be there, or is it Tōji's rich patrons who have their own agendas and are using Tōji as a place to sort of present their vision of Buddhism or modernity or things like that?
Thank you very much for a great question. When it comes to 1930 Tōji, I think the answer is the latter. Interesting that when it comes to Tōji, actually the Tōji as an institution didn't have enough money to pay for the paintings. So what happened is a group of wealthy businessmen in Kyoto got together and raised money, and they knew Inshō personally. So they not only that they recruited Inshō, but they also pay for it. And then also happened to be that they were sort of like a regular customers of Dōmoto's, market paintings, like just like all these birds and flower paintings in the scroll format. So so I just imagine that due to this particular situation, they sort of this group of merchants sort of inserted themselves to make this happen. I just assume that there's a lot to do with these patrons and an Inshō rather than temples. So it's a fascinating situation. Actually, it's really case by case. There's no like a specific rule. It seems like each commission has a different life. Thank you. Yes.
Is this pattern particular to Japan or
Good question. See.
Korea, for example?
Yes, I like to know. Actually, I don't know. I mean, the sliding door is unique to Japan, right?
Yes.
And I think it's interesting that sliding doors can be detached and then put it in a museum. So that's the reason why this is a really uniquely Japanese situation. But I mean, this can be, I mean, there are some studies about Matisse involvement with decorating, the famous churches. And I tried to get some information about other cultures. Yeah, so it is actually a great question. Thank you. But I actually talked to somebody in Korean art and Chinese art, and they both told me that the sliding door, the format itself is actually very uniquely Japanese. So that's something that we can talk about. But icons, no way. I mean, icons everywhere, and then the commission of icons is such a central, task for communities, and So yes, it's very universal. Thank you very much. Great question.
So thank you. And if you have any questions, other questions, please, talk to her, privately. So thank you so much for coming today. And
Thank you so much. Thank you.